A couple of weeks, 2 weeks ago, I believe it is now, time does fly when you're having fun, and when a lot's going on. 2 weeks ago, I wasn't here on Sunday. I was with the Bermans, had been with the Bermans all day Saturday and then traveled home on Sunday morning, actually. But we'd been with the Bermans up at Sue Berman's sister's house, Judy, so that we could be a part of a wedding celebration with Jody. Got that right, didn't I? I was over there actually at the very last minute. I was over there kind of panicking that I get those Judys and Jodys and everything wrong. But wonderful time, just a great time of celebration. But having left Friday night, I turned the air conditioner up to 80 degrees in the house. It's not that I'm cheap. It's that I'm frugal. Even the dog wasn't going to be there. Judy had the dog, so we don't have any fish to keep cool or anything like that. Turned it up to 80. We had this wonderful time, celebration. Came home Sunday evening, opened the door, stepped in, and it was like an ice box in the house. Honestly, it was like opening the freezer door, and sticking your head in. Opened that door, and boom! Apparently, there had been a thunderstorm at Saturday that evening that we were away. And so I went in to check. The first thing I thought was, forgot to set the air conditioner. But I looked at it, and it's set at 80, and it's 65 degrees in the house. And so that's how cold it felt. Whew. And so I quickly played with the thermostat a little bit, and nothing would happen. It kept running. The thing kept cranking, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And so Karen said, well, I'll go check the breakers. And she turned on the basement lights, or tried to turn on the basement lights. And the basement lights wouldn't come on. And by then, I had checked my phone. I was trying to check the internet on my phone to get the weather, see what happened. And the internet was down. And so I began to think, well, you know what? Must have had a storm. Maybe lightning knocked some things out. So I began a process of troubleshooting or diagnosing the problems. Went downstairs with a flashlight and found out that something had tripped the breaker, and I threw the breaker and the basement lights came on. Success. That's pretty good, that quick, isn't it? We couldn't figure out about the internet, however. I looked all over. It was off. The power was off. And so we're looking around. Finally, Karen notices that on one of the outlets, there's a ground fault interrupt, and it has a little light. She said, oh, that little light's glowing. Push the button. Push the button. The internet came on. That's pretty good, isn't it? So I went back up, and I'm fooling with the air conditioner. I'm doing everything I know what to do, and it will not shut off. I'm trying to diagnose the problem. Finally, the only thing I could do was go down in the basement and shut the air conditioner off with the breakers. Called up Dave Sadison, and he sent out a man. We waited till Monday. There's no use doing that, but Monday he sent out a man. Man was there 5 minutes. He said, your thermostat's bad. I thought of everything but a bad thermostat. And that's the problem, because only about a year and a half ago, I put a new $100 thermostat on that wall. That gripes you a little bit. It's not that I'm cheap. But I was thinking about that diagnosis is perhaps one of the most important things of anything we do. It's why I can't do any mechanical work. I don't know one thing about it. I can't diagnose the problem whatsoever. But I have a personal friend who is an incredible diagnostician who can figure out the problems of the cars, in part because they plug it into a computer and it tells them what's wrong with the cars anyway. But it's diagnosis, right? And medical doctor. We want a doctor who can figure out the problems, right? Really quickly, they take a look and figure out the problems. Diagnosis is the most important thing in our lives. But you know what? The problem is that very often things are misdiagnosed. aren't they? And I think in life as well. I heard a story the other day, actually. I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard a story the other day of a person who was pulled over by a policeman. And the policeman walked up to the car, and he said, as policemen do you know why I pulled you over? I don't know why they asked that question. Not that I've ever been pulled over. But at any rate, he said, do you know why you've been pulled over? And the man, what do we say? No, sir. And we all know, don't we? Why, no, sir. We're hoping it's a broken taillight. And he says, you were speeding. The man says, I don't think it was. Police officer says, you were doing 60 miles an hour. The guy says, 40. Policeman said, no, you were doing 60 miles an hour. I clocked you. He says, I'm doing 40. Policeman said, you were doing 60. He said, I'm doing 40. And the policeman says, you were doing 60, and the wife leans over and said, sir, I found out that it's no use arguing with him when he's had too much to drink. So the man had a deeper problem, didn't he, than speeding. Speeding isn't the issue, and that's why it's important for us to correctly diagnose issues in life. And I'm really pretty big on this. And one of the things about the seminary that I went to is that they really drilled down on us that when we look at the issues of the world, that we are not to deal with the symptoms of the problem. We are to drill down and try to figure out what is the core issue that we need to look at. But people misdiagnose all kinds of things all the time. And one of the contemporary misdiagnoses in our world, and we really cut our teeth on this one, is knowledge. We really do believe that knowledge is a panacea. Knowledge will fix everything. Now, we might not, that's another, once again, that might not be something we keep on the top of our minds all the time, but we are a world, by and large, at least the Western world, that really have cut our teeth on scientific knowledge. We need to realize that the philosophies of people like Aristotle, Plato, for instance, they were based on the notion that knowledge was the highest order, and that the highest order of humankind was to seek and to find knowledge. And we need to understand that in America, in our country, we really do believe that knowledge will fix everything. Listen to the news, for instance. Listen to the news that when you hear about things going on in the world, almost everything can be fixed, we hear, by better education. It really is who we are. And I must admit, it's part of who I am as well. I am a very rational person. I like knowledge. And I like truth that is verifiable, larger than myself. So I want you to know I'm having a terrible argument with so-called postmodernism, the notion that we live in today that truth is individual. Truth is my experience of what's going on. That's where truth, it's gotten on this slippery slope. That's where truth is. But I like truth that has something to do with an area that I have come to, and then I can test out that belief that I have come to some place of truth. I can test that out in the world, that it's the same over here. It's the same with you. It's the same over here. Something bigger than us that is what I understand as truth. And I believe we're a rational people. So I know one thing. I have fully fallen sway to this. But the problem that we are dealing with is that it is a slippery slope in the world that we live in today. And knowledge and truth seems to be something that is hard to come by. Truth, what is truth? I believe, for instance, that truth has to do with the notion that we can figure out what is right and wrong, and we can live what is right and wrong. But there's where truth lets us down. Because as soon as I say something is true, you will probably disagree with me, right? I think it is true, for instance, that I am the most intelligent person in here. That's laughter in agreement, right? It's laughing with me, right? What is truth? And why, if knowledge is a panacea, do we live in the world that we're in? Why do we hear stories like another person gunning down people in a military reservation? Why do we hear stories of 2 teens killing 5 family members? Why do we hear these kinds of stories? Don't we know any better than that? Well, I believe what we are not looking at is that when we look at truth as a panacea, that truth is what will get us out of here, we are not paying attention to a biblical diagnosis of the world. It's interesting that the Bible does not go to knowledge, but the Bible often runs, in fact, you can make a statement in terms of a general notion of the Bible, always runs to remembrance, not to knowledge. If we want to look for some way to make sense out of our world, or we want to look for that which might direct us in a better place, we need to recognize that the Bible is always calling us back to remember. If you look at the Old Testament, most of the Old Testament issues of remembrance of what God has done, and Jesus himself, a large part of his ministry is to call into remembrance of who God is and what God has done for us. Because here's the truth. It's not that we don't know enough. It's that we don't seem to have the willpower to live into what we know. Do you understand where knowledge then is that which can let us down? It's not that we don't know enough. I read a story just yesterday. It was a news blurb on a 15-year-old who had abducted, abused, and killed an 8-year-old. It's in the news. It's right in the news today. Happened sometime early this week, I think. But the article I read was youth advocates who were saying that as a 15-year-old, we need to be careful in what we think about that because he wasn't old enough to know right from wrong. A 15-year-old who tried to cover up the act. He knew right from wrong, correct? He tried to cover it up. He knew it was wrong. He knew what he shouldn't have done, but he didn't seem to have the willpower to do what he should have done, right? But as we look at the Bible, we look at King David and look at what happened with King David and Bathsheba and Uriah. It's not that David did not know that sending Uriah out to the front line and having him killed to cover up that affair. It's not that he didn't know it was wrong. It's not that he didn't know it was wrong to have an affair with Bathsheba, right? We know the story. He knew the Hebrew scriptures. He knew right from wrong. It's not that he didn't know. It's that he didn't seem to have the willpower to live into what he did know. Knowledge can point us to the right place, but knowing the right thing and doing the right thing are 2 different things altogether, aren't they? And it's not that Peter in the courtyard didn't know that denying Jesus was the wrong thing. He knew it was the wrong thing. But he knew doing the right thing might endanger his life. And so he didn't have the willpower to live into what he had known. And so knowledge will not fix this world. The fundamental problems with human beings is essentially our unwillingness to do what we already know we should do. Now, I've lifted up examples, of course, that I don't think any of us would be a part of. But I think we all recognize at the same time that on various levels, we are beset with the same issue, aren't we? It's not that we don't know what we should be about. We've heard it all. We've learned it. We have been preached to. We have preached it. It's not that we don't know what we should be about as followers of Lord Jesus Christ. It's that oftentimes, in order to actually live into what we know we should do, is difficult. Oftentimes not fun. And so we lack the willingness to live into what we are called to live into as people of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so there is a biblical diagnosis for this, and it is remember. The Bible calls us to remembrance all the time. The Bible's general focus is not on knowledge, but on remembrance. We are to bring back to mind what we already know and to get in touch with what we already know about Almighty God. And that's why then, and I want to read for you, that's why in Phillipians chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, Paul says this: if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in the Spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ, who, and this is a great song poem of the early church, who being in the very nature of God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. I am sure, and I think if we look at the experience of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, that Jesus was not particularly enthralled with what was to come his way. The Bible tells us he knew and he sweat as if great droplets of blood that fell from him because he knew what was ahead. But it seems to be the difference between him and us oftentimes is he knew what he needed to do and he had the willpower to do it. We know what we need to be about as God's children, and we need to know that God has already given us a willpower. That's why here Paul calls the community into remembrance, to remember who Jesus is, to remember what Jesus did for them, but for a particular purpose, this remembrance. And the particular purpose was so that they, that community, and we as well, might live into who Jesus is. That's our call. It's not just to be here. It's not just hope for heaven in some time. But our call is to remember all the time who Jesus is, what he done for us, so that we might be Christ for the world. That's why I think Jesus himself, in talking about the Holy Meal, I think Jesus himself in the upper room said this is a call to remembrance. You were supposed to take part in this meal as an act of remembrance. So as we take part in this meal, as we eat bread and drink the fruit of the vine, we are participating in an actual physical act of remembrance. So when we receive communion, part of what we should be doing is remembering who Jesus is and remembering what he has done for us and remembering the promise God has given that he is present in these elements of fruit and bread of the vine.